Early in the 17th century, there was a real fear of witches, and paranoia sent many innocent women to the scaffold. One man would take advantage of this fear, and made it his profession to seek out witches, going down in history as the Witchfinder General, Matthew Hopkins. Almost nothing is known of Matthew Hopkins before 1644, and there are no surviving contemporary documents concerning him or his family. What is known is that he was born in Great Wenham, Suffolk, and was the fourth son of 6 children. His father, James Hopkins, was a Puritan clergyman and vicar of St John's of Great Wenham, Suffolk. His father was popular with his parishioners, one of whom in 1619 left money to purchase Bibles for his then 3 children, James, John and Thomas. Thus Matthew Hopkins could not have been born before 1619 and could not have been older than 28 when he died, but he may have been as young as 25. In the early 1640s, Hopkins moved to Manningtree, Essex, a town near the River Stour, about 10 miles from Wenham. According to tradition, Hopkins used his recently acquired inheritance of £66, 13 shillings and 4 pence to establish himself as a gentleman and to buy the Fawn Inn in Mistley. From the way that he presented evidence in trials, Hopkins is commonly thought to have been trained as a lawyer, but there is little evidence to suggest this was the case. According to his book The Discovery of Witches, Hopkins began his career as a witchfinder after he overheard women discussing their meeting with the devil in March 1644 in Manningtree. The first accusations were actually made by John Stern, and Hopkins was appointed as his assistant. 23 women were accused of witchcraft and were tried at Chelmsford in 1645. As the English Civil War was in progress, the trial was conducted not by the Justices of Assize, but by the Justices of Peace, presided over by the Earl of Warwick. 4 died in prison, and 19 were convicted to hang. During this period, excepting Middlesex and chartered towns, no records show any persons charged of witchcraft being sentenced to death other than by the judges of the Assize. Hopkins and Stern, accompanied by the women who performed the pricking, were soon travelling over eastern England, claiming to be officially commissioned by Parliament to uncover and prosecute witches. Together with their female assistants, they were well paid for their work, and it has been suggested that this was a motivation for his actions. Hopkins stated that his fees were to maintain his company with 3 horses, and that he took 20 shillings a town. The records at Stowmarket show their cost charged to the town to have been £23, worth over £4,000 today, plus his travelling expenses. The cost to the local community of Hopkins and his company were such that, in 1645, a special local tax rate had to be levied in Ipswich. Various methods were used to discover witches, and Hopkins received many accusations from informants. He would then have the suspects closely watched to see if they were secretly feeding a familiar, and would search their homes for any telltale signs of sorcery. Once evidence was discovered, the suspect, often an elderly woman, would be taken for further questioning. Hopkins often used techniques such as sleep deprivation to extract confessions from his victims. He would also cut the arm of the accused with a blunt knife, and if she did not bleed, she was said to be a witch. Another of his methods was the swimming test, based on the idea that, as witches had renounced their baptism, water would reject them. Suspects were tied to a chair and thrown into water. All those who floated were considered to be witches. Hopkins was warned against the use of swimming without receiving the victim's permission first. This led to the legal abandonment of the test by the end of 1645. Hopkins and his assistants also looked for the Devil's Mark. This was a mark that all witches were thought to possess, that was said to be dead to all feeling, and would not bleed, although it was sometimes a mole, birthmark, or an extra nipple. If the suspected witch had no such visible marks, invisible ones could be discovered by pricking. Therefore, witch prickers were employed, who pricked the accused with knives and special needles looking for such marks, normally after the suspect had been shaved of all bodily hair. Parliament was well aware of Hopkins and his team's activities, as shown by the concerned reports of the Bury St Edmunds witch trials of 1645. Before the trial, a report was carried to Parliament, stating, as if some busy men had made use of some ill arts to extort such confessions. A special commission was granted for the trial of these witches. After the trial and execution, the Moderate Intelligencer, a parliamentarian paper published during the English Civil War, in an editorial of the 4th to the 11th of September 1645, expressed unease with the affairs in Bury. Hopkins' witch-hunting methods were outlined in his book The Discovery of Witches, which was published in 1647. These practices were recommended in law books. During the year following the publication of Hopkins' book, trials and executions for witchcraft began in the New England colonies, with the hanging of Elsie Young of Windsor, Connecticut on the 26th of May 1647, followed by the conviction of Margaret Jones. As described in the journal of the Governor John Withrop, the evidence assembled against Margaret Jones was gathered by the use of Hopkins' techniques of searching and watching. Matthew Hopkins died at his home in Manningtree, Essex on the 12th of August 1647, probably of pleural tuberculosis. He was buried a few hours after his death in the graveyard of the Church of St Mary at Mistley Heath. At the time of his death, Hopkins styled himself as the Witchfinder General, although that title was never bestowed upon him by Parliament, and he had acquired a great deal of wealth. He sent more accused people to be hanged for witchcraft than all other witch hunters in England of the previous 160 years, and was solely responsible for the increase in witch trials during those years.